And you wrote a post recently about trying to understand the left and socialism. So tell us a little bit about that post. What are your thoughts on the economic orthodoxy of the left? Do you believe they're really interested in a free and prosperous society, or is it more about control and power over that society?
Um, so no, I mean, I think so the Understanding the Left essay, which I recommend to your listeners, just Google Grumpy Economist and you'll find it. I was trying to more on the sort of the far wokey left end that pervades university campuses, rather than judging it, understand what is their motivation, even if they don't necessarily understand their own motivation. Because if you look at it, it really has all the signs of a political religious cult. You have to master all sorts of meaningless words that change every day, and it's actually it feels like Protestantism about 1530. You have there's an original sin that you have to work constantly to overcome, and it says America is nothing but racist, colonialist, and we should get rid of the founding fathers. Anyway, wokey ideology is not something I'm good at explaining, but it certainly is. It has a function of demonizing the opposition and being a way to take over politically, in somewhat the same way that Soviet communism did. There was a whole bunch of meaningless words, and all sorts of well-thinking people said, "Oh yes, how wonderful! We're going to save the world for the workers," and that didn't turn out so well. So I think it functions in much the same way. And that's the point of the essay. Your question about free and prosperous society, I think honestly, if you just listen to the left, even starting with the centrist Democrats who have just taken over, the answer is no. They're not interested in prosperity. They're interested in distribution. Yeah. It's not about
it's a fundamentally different goal.
It's how we divide the pie. It's about social justice and climate justice. It's certainly not about freedom as we define freedom of expression. It's about, making sure everybody says the right things and doesn't say hurtful speech. So neither personal freedom nor political freedom. I guess there's a certain amount of sexual and social freedom that is part of the agenda on the left. We'll grant them that. And not general prosperity. The thing, I got to say, the most important thing in economics is the thing no one's paying any attention to, and that is long-run growth. Why did the U.S. grow at 4% for decades after World War II? Why is it now stuck at 2% with no sign of getting better? And there's just no force in Washington that's thinking hard about long-run growth.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that, but I do want to note it's important to understand that they have a different definition of freedom and prosperity, as you noted. So their goals are different, right? Our goal might be the aggregate prosperity, because you can't redistribute anything if you're not growing. But on the notion of freedom, there's a fundamentally different definition, and they'll say this often: you can't be free if you don't have this service. Whereas the conservative mind and the conservative disposition is to say, no, freedom means no one is infringing on your rights to pursue your happiness. So we just have fundamentally different definitions, and I think that manifests in policy considerations as well.
So I would distinguish the ideology from the actions here. There's a ideology which says we must give to the poor and help the downtrodden and so forth. Now, yes, we must do this by providing them services, because secretly we're aristocrats and we think the poor are a bunch of dummies. They think the poor are a bunch of dummies incapable of taking opportunity and doing something with it. So they have to be provided for it. That's the ideology. That's not the practice. The war on poverty has been going on for 50 years now. Looks like poverty won. Certainly, the civil rights era was 50 years ago. And if you judge from them, the problem is only worse, despite all of our remarkable efforts as a society to do things about these problems. So the practice ends up being just growing the size of the government, and it's what it does in our affairs, and feeding the base, which is fairly well off. There's still, we're talking about canceling student loans and not about helping schizophrenic homeless people. There's a big difference between the ideology and the practice.
Yeah, and I'd fully agree with that. The practice seems to be about caring the most, right? Whatever feels the
It's
best.
saying you're caring the most, but you're paying off interest groups.
Yeah.
So so you got a choice. Do you want teachers unions or do you want black inner city kids who need an education? I went to a largely black inner city high school and I toured around the south side of Chicago on a sports team, so I kind of saw what it's like. Or do you want to consign kids to a horrible education run by teachers unions, or do you want the teachers unions? Well, they're siding with the teachers unions. So it is about paying off political constituencies in the end, not act in the name of helping people, but you don't actually helping people.
Yeah, it's covered for with the language of compassion. The language of compassion is the vehicle for these detrimental policies that simply don't work. And I think, and fundamentally, what I see on the left when it comes to economic theory is a refusal to acknowledge trade-offs. In economics is fundamentally the study of trade-offs, and incentives and how those interact. Policy making and governing really should be the acknowledgement of trade-offs. There are no solutions; there are simply trade-offs, and it seems to me that the theories of the left bypass that to an exceptional degree.
I think we need to get a stone carver out, and you get a PhD in economics just right now from saying that. Incentives, trade-offs, and I would add unintended consequences of perhaps well-intentioned past policies. If we could just carve those on the steps of the Capitol, we'd make a lot of progress.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so
even among, you asked about the mindset of sort of left-wing economists. They tend to forget all three of those. They are more interested in playing redistributor, who gives money to who, really, which is something economics has very little to say about. They tend to completely ignore the incentives of programs. If we cancel all student debts, what message does that send to people who are either skimping and scraping to pay for their college education at a local college versus taking on a lot of debt to go to some big fancy place and get a degree in grievance studies? There's some bad incentive. And they think in terms of just throwing money around rather than the incentives of, as you said, giving people the opportunity to go grab something for themselves. There's a vision of a government check that you go spend while you live in a trailer that seems to be the nirvana for the typical Democrat.